Welcome to the Dingir-Zone. Hi, I'm Victor. You may know me from my other channel, Write Your Own Operating System, where I discuss technology topics in depth. But I'm also interested in ancient Near Eastern mythology and how it relates to the religions we have today. And when I started looking into that topic, I read a lot of Wikipedia articles, and one of the articles I've read was about the Babylonian Enuma Eliš. Okay, and I've read that, and it said, there's this divine battle between Marduk, the Babylonian main god. This is Marduk, who has this divine battle against the sea goddess Tiamat. And in this battle, he splits Tiamat in half. And I thought, hey, wait a minute. Marduk splitting a sea goddess in half sounds a lot like Moses splitting the sea in half, right? And I've spent a lot of time on this question and compared the Enuma Eliš with the Exodus extensively. I was thinking about publishing this in a scientific journal because I think it is true. I think the Exodus and Enuma Eliš really link together. But the problem is I don't think you can publish this. There's just going to be too much pushback when you're basically disproving the Bible, right? For a scientific publication, you need peer review, and nobody would peer review this, right? If you go to a theologian and tell him, hey, would you please sign this thing that says your whole entire field of expertise is nonsense, nobody would do that, right? You just couldn't publish this. And I've looked into the matter a bit, what the scholarly consensus is, and I've come across a paper by Tsumura, which really says, no, Enuma Eliš doesn't relate to the Bible. For example, he argues that the book of Genesis doesn't relate to Enuma Eliš because, he argues that in Enuma Eliš, Marduk uses the corpse of Tiamat to create the earth and the firmament, right? And he says, that's creation out of something pre-existing. Whereas in Genesis 1, you have the creation out of nothing, ex nihilo. So that's a completely different creation. And then, of course, this cannot be taken from Enuma Eliš. Although I think that's complete nonsense. If I already believe in ex nihilo creation, of course, I can take a different story and rewrite it a little. He pretends like nobody could do such a thing, right? And also he argues that there's no divine battle in the Bible, right? If there's no divine battle, then it cannot have been taken from Enuma Eliš. But again, if I already believe in monotheism, there's only one God, and I take a polytheistic story and want to put it in my Bible, then of course I have to do something, right? I have to rip out all the other gods and replace them maybe with something else. And I mean, replacing the sea goddess with the sea itself kind of makes sense, right? And you can absolutely see that in Noah's deluge story, right? You have Noah's deluge story where you have one god who drowns all the humans and who rescues one family, right? And when you compare that to the Gilgamesh epic, which I will make another video about, these stories are almost identical. They are so close to each other, it's absolute preposterous to say that these aren't the same story. So, the original, the Gilgamesh epic, has two gods. One of them wants to kill all the humans, Enlil, and a different god, Enki, is against this. And because he's against this, he rescues one family. Okay, and yeah, it's absolutely obvious that this Gilgamesh epic has been taken and turned into the Noah's deluge story. And there they did the same thing. They took a story with two gods and made a story with one god out of it. So if they did it there, why shouldn't they have done it here? It doesn't make sense to argue that. And frankly, I think it might have happened the other way around. Maybe they first took the story, including the divine battle, and maybe only later, maybe at the time when Cyrus the Great freed Babylon and freed the Jewish people from the Babylonian exile, maybe his influence on them caused them to become monotheistic. Right? The old Canaanite stories, there you have polytheism. You have El and Baal and Asherah and Yam and what else do we have? Whatever. But yeah, they were taken into the Babylonian exile, and when they were freed by Cyrus the Great, Cyrus became a great prophet of Judaism. And yeah, Cyrus the Great was Persian, and the Persians were Zoroastrians, and Zoroastrianism is monotheistic. There you have one god, Ahura Mazda, and maybe they gave them the idea of monotheism. I don't know, but it would make sense to me that they might first have taken the whole story with the divine battle, and I think that might be where some other parts of the Bible come from that we will talk about. And maybe only later they decided, hey, we want to be monotheists now. Let's remove Rahab, or whatever the name is, from the story. Okay, let's talk about Exodus and Enuma Elish now. As I said, the clearest sign that Exodus is taken from Enuma Elish, in my opinion, is that in Enuma Elish, Marduk splits a sea goddess. Right, Marduk splits a sea goddess in half, and in Exodus, Moses splits the sea in half. Another interesting point I want to talk about is that Tihama is the name of the coast of the Arabian Peninsula with the Red Sea. I mean, the Exodus doesn't say Red Sea. Many people believe it says Red Sea, but that was a translation error. It actually says Reed Sea. But I don't know, maybe the Red Sea was called Reed Sea back then. I don't know. But I find it really interesting that this coast is called Tihama. So if someone splits Tihama in half, it would be splitting the Red Sea in half. I don't know. It's just interesting to me. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe the coast wasn't even called Tihama back then. I don't know, but I think it's an interesting point, especially when you think about the Red Sea. You know, it kind of has a snake shape, right? And here, where the Sinai Peninsula is, it kind of looks like a mouth, right? So I don't know, maybe that had some influence here, but that's just a minor topic. I think a better point is that in Exodus 12, verse 37, 600,000 Israelites, children of Israel, left Egypt. Okay, and in Enuma Elish, we see that there are 600 gods. Okay, I think that's really, really interesting that there are 600 gods, and here we have 600,000 Israelites. And especially when you think about here 600 gods of the Apsu. The Apsu is the sea. And so these are, yes, 600 sea gods, or lower sea gods, I don't know, but this also sounds like it has something to do with Exodus, where these 600,000 people come through the sea, and yeah, I don't know. I just think this is really, really interesting here. And this also would show that people didn't care about changing the story, right? If you take 600 gods and turn them into 600,000 humans, yeah, why wouldn't you then turn a sea goddess into the sea, right? If they are already willing to change the story to fit their ideas, yeah, then why not do it in this battle also? Okay, but let's start at the beginning. In the Enuma Eliš, in tablet 1, line 22. What we have there is these gods that have been created. They are too loud, okay? There are too many of them, and because of that they are too loud, and that annoys Tiamat and her husband Apsu, who is the old god of the sea. Okay, and yeah, in Exodus 1, 9-10, the Pharaoh says, "Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we." So he also says there are too many of them, and yeah, he's afraid that they might fight against them. Okay, and that's why he wants to impose all that work on them. So in line 35, here we have Apsu saying what he wants to do about the problem that there are too many of these gods. And he says their behavior has become displeasing to me, I cannot sleep, I will destroy and break up their way of life, that silence may reign and we may sleep. So he wants to kill all these gods. And in Exodus 1:16, the Pharaoh goes to the two midwives. It's kind of strange, right? Two midwives for 1 million people, right? There's 600,000 men alone, including women and children. That must be at least 1 million people of these Hebrews. So only 2 midwives is really strange. But it makes perfect sense if you know ancient Near Eastern mythology. Because in ancient Near Eastern mythology, you often have 2 midwife goddesses. Okay? So the fact that here we also have 2 kind of makes sense in that context. But yeah, he goes to these 2 midwives and tells them that they shall kill all male children. Okay, similar to what Herod does when Jesus is born. But yeah, it's the same topic, right? Here they both want to kill the children, right? Okay, but here then, here the midwives disobey him. In Enuma Eliš we have Tiamat also being against this killing of the children. She raged and cried to her spouse. She grieved and says, "How can we destroy what we have given birth to?" So what Tiamat proposes instead, and that's again a pretty interesting point here, is that their behavior causes distress. Let us tighten discipline. So she wants to impose more work on them to make them more silent, to shut them up. And in 1:11, Exodus, the Pharaoh also says, afflict them with their burdens, right? So he also wants to give them more work to shut them up, which, in the case of Exodus, it just doesn't work. They still multiply and grow. That's a bit of a difference here in Enuma Elish. Apsu just decides, no, I won't give them more work, I will kill them. And in line 120, here the children of these two gods complain and say, we have too much work, you do not love us, consider our burden, our eyes are hollow. In Exodus 2:23, here also the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God. So they also complain about all the work they have. Okay, a bit back here. Here we have Ea, that's Marduk's father. Ea is the god of knowledge. That's the same god as Enki in Sumerian, by the way. The one who saved one human family when Enlil wanted to drown everyone. Ea, who excelled in knowledge, knowledge god of knowledge, god of wisdom, the skilled and learned. Ea, who knows everything, perceived their tricks, so he knows what they want to do. And then he puts Apsu to slumber. Apsu falls asleep, and then Ea kills Apsu. Okay, so Ea murders someone, which corresponds to Moses, who looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian. Okay, so Moses also killed someone. Then after he killed Apsu, he rested quietly in his chamber. Well, his chamber is the Apsu temple, which is a water temple, because he, by killing Apsu, he has become the new god of the sea, of the sweet water, at least. And he called it Apsu, whose shrines he appointed. So he sits in this water temple, whereas Moses here sits down by a well. So that might not be the strongest connection, but I think it's still at least interesting. They both rest in the presence of water. I don't know. I think that's a weaker point, but anyhow. Hey everyone, Editing Victor here. While cutting this part, I realized another interesting connection here. So Moses is sitting by a well, right? And Ea's main cult center was in Eridu, where there was a temple for him called the Apsu, and this temple actually had a well. It had a fountain in front of it, and this is actually the oldest temple known to have such a well, and that's believed to be the origin of baptism and the ritual washings in Islam and Judaism. So I think that's maybe an even stronger connection between these two passages. Here then Ea goes to Damkina, his wife, and he begets his son Marduk. Okay, so he begets his son. In Apsu, Marduk was born. Moses also goes to his wife Zipporah, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom. Okay, he also gets a son. Now here, the story of Marduk. He is breastfed. Here we break the order a bit. In Exodus, this is not the son of the protagonist so far. This is a protagonist himself. Here, in 2:9, the women took the child and nursed it. Depending on the translation, some translations say he was breastfed. So he's also breastfed, just like Marduk. Of course, here in Exodus we have this story that Moses is put into a basket and put in the river. And this is actually not from Enuma Elish. This comes from the birth narrative of Sargon of Akkad. Here this is the birth legend of Sargon. My mother was a high priestess, yada yada yada. She set me in a basket of rushes. With bitumen she sealed my lid, which here it's sealed with slime and pitch. I think pitch and bitumen are basically the same thing. She cast me into the river, and then the river takes him to Aki, the drawer of water, and Aki then takes him as a son and appoints him as a gardener. And while he was a gardener, Ishtar granted him her love. And in these old stories, when Ishtar loves you, then you are basically the king of Mesopotamia, basically. So even the name Sargon means rightful king, as far as I know. That's where that part of Exodus comes from. Again, Moses is raised by a nurse. At least people think she's a nurse. I think it's his actual mother who raises him, but anyhow. One interesting point here in Enuma Elish, line 105, is that Anu formed and gave birth to the four winds. I think it's Marduk who then forms dust and sets a hurricane to drive it. This, I think, sounds a lot like Exodus 13:21, where the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud. Sounds pretty similar, if you ask me. Then in line 128, the gods talk to Tiamat, who hadn't done anything about the killing of Apsu, and they complain that she hasn't avenged Apsu's death. And then Tiamat agrees to start a war. And then Ea flees and takes refuge with Ansha, his father, which corresponds to Exodus 2:15, where Pharaoh wants to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, where he meets Reuel, who gives him his daughter Zipporah as a wife. So this becomes his father-in-law. So both of them take refuge with a father figure, right? It's just a bit of a different order. In the Enuma Elish, Ea kills Apsu, then begets a son, then Tiamat decides to kill him, and then he takes refuge with Anshar. Whereas in Exodus, Moses kills that Egyptian. The Pharaoh immediately decides to kill him, so he first flees to Midian, and then there he begets his son. Okay, slightly different order, but I think this is really very close and too close to be a coincidence, if you ask me. Okay, now in line 53, Anshar tells Ea to go back and take responsibility for killing Apsu. So he tells him to go back, which in Exodus happens in chapter 3, line 10. I will send thee unto Pharaoh. Right, so he tells him to go back to Egypt. Here God tells Moses to go back. But Ea disagrees. He says it makes no sense. I shouldn't go back. In Exodus 3:11, Moses also disagrees and says unto God, "Who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh?" It's also a bit strange if you if you talk back to God, God would normally smite you, right? But anyhow, finally, Ea obeys. He heard the speech of Anshar, he took the road to her, proceeded on the route to her, which Moses does in Exodus 4:20. Took his wife and son and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. When Ea reaches Tiamat, he perceived the tricks of Tiamat. It's an interesting expression here when you consider that in Exodus 7:10, Moses and Aaron went unto Pharaoh. Aaron cast his rod before Pharaoh, and the rod became a serpent. And then the Pharaoh called the wise men and the sorcerers, and they also did the same thing. Okay, so the people, the sorcerers of the Pharaoh, are able to do the same magic tricks. Interesting thing. I don't think many people know this part of the story, but perceiving the tricks of Tiamat, I don't know. That also sounds related. Particularly when you consider here the rod becomes a serpent, because in Enuma Elish, tablet 134, Mother Hubur gives birth to giant serpents. And they have sharp teeth and they are merciless and yada yada yada, but there are also serpents created. Okay, Now, after Ea has perceived the tricks of Tiamat, he stopped, fell silent, and turned back. So he failed to speak. That's an interesting point, and has to go back because of that. That is interesting when you compare it to Exodus 4:10, where Moses says, I am not eloquent, I am slow of speech, and of a slow tongue. So he also complains about his ability to speak. Okay. So Ea returns unsuccessfully. Of course, Moses and Aaron return unsuccessfully a lot of times. In Enuma Elish, then Anu does the same thing. He also goes to Tiamat, also perceives her tricks. He also stops, falls silent, and turns back. And after that, nobody else dares to go to Tiamat until Marduk steps up and becomes the new hero. But interestingly, in tablet 3, line 5, we have Anshar talking to Kaka, his vizier, and he tells him, you are skilled in making inquiry, learned in address. So he praises the verbal skills of someone, which in Exodus 4, I think corresponds to the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well. So he also praises someone's verbal skills. Then Moses is instructed to talk to Aaron, and Aaron is then supposed to repeat the words that God gives to Moses, which here in 3:12, Anshar tells Kaka to repeat his words. Kaka, the vizier, is sent to Lachmu and Lachamu. Have the gods, my fathers, brought to my presence. Okay, so he is supposed to invite people and let all the gods be brought, let them confer as they sit at a table, let them eat grain, let them drink ale. So he announces a feast, which I think is reflected here in 12:3. Speak unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, in the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamp, according to the house of their fathers, a lamp for an house. So Moses is sent to announce the Passover feast. Then in 3:125, there's a bit of repetition here, which is just skipped in this translation. The gods are told about Tiamat's plan to kill everyone, and the gods cry about this. The Igigi moaned in distress. Exodus 14:10. The children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. So they also cry. And why do they do that? What has gone wrong that she took this decision about us? We did not know what Tiamat was doing. So they are afraid to be killed, right? And here this is the same thing. The Israelites said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness. So they are also afraid to die. then the feast is celebrated. Which here happens in 1228. They celebrate the feast, and they do that with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. That's a bit of a difference. They don't have beer and ale. Whatever. Okay, here in Enuma Elish, this feast is now where Marduk is proposed as a new ruler, and he is tested. He is told to do a magic trick. He's supposed to make the constellations disappear and reappear, which in Exodus happens earlier. This happens in Exodus 4. Well, what is that in thine hand? He said, a rod, cast it on the ground, and it became a serpent. So Moses also does a magic trick, and down here he repeats that magic trick in front of the elders of Israel. So he is then acknowledged as their new ruler or leader, which here happens in line 27 to 29. When the gods, his fathers, saw the effect of his utterance, they rejoiced and offered congratulation. Marduk is the king. They added to him a mace, a throne, and a rod. Okay, interesting. But again, we have a bit of a different structure here. We first have unsuccessful pleading, then a new guy comes, then there is a feast and he does magic tricks, whereas in the others, in the Exodus, Moses is the ruler or becomes the ruler much earlier, before someone goes and unsuccessfully pleads to the antagonist, right? Interestingly, in the Exodus, this is not very well known, but the Pharaoh actually wants to let the people go, and it is that God just prevents him from that. God hardens his heart multiple times. In particular in Exodus 11:10, which is the last time before the firstborn sons are killed. So here the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. Okay, so God doesn't allow the Pharaoh to let them go, and this is the last thing. Before the killing of the firstborn sons. So God really wants to kill these children and doesn't allow the Pharaoh to let the people go to prevent this, right? So very merciful, right? Also in tablet 2, line 100, we also have Ea and Anu who want to appease her rage that her heart may relax. So the decision there is also a matter of the heart. Okay, another interesting connection. The 10 plagues in the Exodus are not in Enuma Elish, but in Inanna and Chukwuletuda. That is ETCSL 1.3.3, if you want to look it up. There Inanna is enraged at Shukaletuda, and she searches for him, and to force the people to give him to her, she also brings several plagues over the people. One of the plagues is that she turns all the water to blood. That's also one of the plagues in the Exodus. In Exodus 10:16, by the way, the Pharaoh says, "I have sinned against the Lord and against you." So he acknowledges the existence of God, and he confesses to have sinned. Shouldn't God forgive him at this point? If God doesn't accept him as a follower now, does that mean that conversion doesn't exist? Why can you convert today? I don't understand it. Here you have someone who wants to convert, apparently, but God doesn't allow it. In Exodus we then have the death of the firstborn sons, and Israel leaves Egypt and goes to the Reed Sea. In Enuma Elish, Marduk prepares for the battle, but the Reed Sea, I want to point out here we have a reed bed that I think is Tiamat's bed. Tiamat gave birth to them all. It's not really explicit here, but I think this reed bed is Tiamat's bed. So if the sea goddess has a reed bed and Moses splits the Reed Sea, I don't know, it looks like another connection. Okay, now Marduk prepares for battle in tablet 4, line 50. 50. He rode the fearful chariot of the irresistible storm. Now in Exodus, the Egyptians have chariots, but what about the good guys? Here Marduk, the good guy, is riding the chariot. Why don't the good guys in Exodus have chariots? And maybe God has a chariot. This is one of the points that I mentioned where I think other parts of the Bible might be referring to an older version of Exodus that may have been changed later, and details may have been removed. Here in Habakkuk 3:8. Was the Lord displeased against the rivers? Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea? That thou didst ride upon thy horses and thy chariots. When he hath wrath against the sea, he has chariots, just like Marduk. He also has a bow, like Marduk has up here. He fashioned a bow. Marduk also has arrows. Sun and moon stood still in the habitation. At the light of thine arrows. God also has arrows. Makes sense when you have a bow. God also has a spear. I couldn't find something like that in Enuma Elish, but here Marduk has a club. His magic mace. And here Marduk creates evil wind, dust storm, tempest. He sent out the 7 winds that he had fashioned, and they took their stand behind him. That's another interesting point. The wind moves behind him. In Exodus 14, 19 to 20, the angel of God which went before the camp of Israel removed and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. Interesting connection. Now in Enuma Elish, Tiamat has an ally named Kingu. Kingu, her spouse. And that's actually relatively normal in these Chaos Kampf stories, where, here's Kingu. In other versions, in other languages, you have Lotan, Iluyanka, Chedamu, but not in Exodus. Okay, that doesn't seem to be an ally. But, and this is another point where I think a different part of the Bible is talking about an older version of Exodus. Here in Isaiah 51:9, awake, awake, arm of the Lord, clothe yourself with strength, awake as in days gone by, as in generations of old. Was it not you who cut Rahab to pieces, who pierced that monster through? In different translations, this monster here, there's the word dragon. Okay, so this might be talking about a dragon in Exodus. And why is this line here talking about Exodus in the first place? Well, in Isaiah 51:10, it's talking about, was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep? Who made a road in the depth of the sea so that the redeemed might cross over. And who are these redeemed? Those the Lord has rescued will return, they will enter Zion. So these redeemed are the future inhabitants of Zion, which means that these are the Israelites. So this, in my opinion, means that Isaiah 51 is talking about the book of Exodus here, and therefore I think this dragon here also belongs in the book of Exodus. In Isaiah 27, there's some additional details. Verse 8. With his fierce blast he drives her out, as on a day the east wind blows. The day of the east wind, I think, refers here to Exodus 14. By a strong east wind all that night, the Lord caused the sea to go back. Okay, so God uses a strong east wind to divide the waters. And I think that's the east wind we are talking about here. So this Isaiah 27 also talks about Exodus. And here in that chapter, it's talking about Leviathan, the gliding serpent, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea. So I think this tells us the name of that serpent in Exodus. Also in Psalm 74, 13 and 14, thou didst divide the sea by thy strength, thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters, thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness, I think, might refer to the Israelites on their 40-year journey through the desert. But that's my personal speculation. I have heard that the name Rahab that we've seen here in Isaiah 51, this Rahab here, I've heard comes from Ra-Ahab and means arrogant. Arrogance is a property of Tiamat. Why are you aggressive and arrogant? But I actually think that the word Rahab more likely comes from Akkadian. Rahabu, or Ra'abu, which means to shake, tremble, to be angry, which of course are also properties of Tiamat. I could see this happening, like maybe someone sat in a theater and watched a play of Enuma Eliš, and they talked about the angry Tiamat, and maybe they heard that word and thought it was a name, and maybe that's where that comes from, but I don't know, that's just a guess. Okay, now in this battle, Bel, that's an epithet of Marduk, drew near, surveying the maw of Tiamat. He observed the tricks of Kingu, her spouse. As he looked, he lost. As Marduk looked, Kingu lost his nerve. His determination went, and he faltered. So Marduk strikes Kingu with fear, and I think that is reflected in Exodus 14:24. The Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians. So they also become afraid when he looks at them. Bel, again an epithet of Marduk, lifted up the storm flood, his great weapon. And here in Exodus 14:26, the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So they are also killed with basically a storm flood. 98. Marduk let loose the evil wind, so he attacks Tiamat with wind. And here, this strong east wind all night is what God uses to split the sea. Then Marduk pierces Tiamat's belly with an arrow. Again, Isaiah 51:9. A monster is pierced. Then after Marduk has killed Tiamat, her allies dispersed, her divine aides who went beside her in trembling and fear beat a retreat. So her allies now become afraid and try to escape. And in Exodus 14:25, God took off their chariot wheels that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians." So they also become afraid and try to escape. But Tiamat's allies were completely surrounded, unable to escape. And down here, together with their warfare, he trampled them beneath him. So I think Marduk, I think he kills them. I think that's meant here. And here of course Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength. When the morning appeared and the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, so they don't escape, they get surrounded by the water and die. Then after that, Marduk takes his merciless club and smashes Tiamat's skull, which I think corresponds to Psalm 74, 13 to 14 again. Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength, thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters, breaking the heads of Leviathan in pieces. And in 137, Marduk splits her in two, and one half of her he set up and stretched out as the heavens. Okay, so he uses her carcass to create heaven and earth. And then again he gives meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. So that's interesting here. This might refer to the Israelites being sustained using the remains of this dragon. I think this might correspond to tablet 6, line 29. Where they use Kingu's blood for the creation of humans. Thou didst cleave the fountain and the flood, thou driedst up mighty rivers. I think this might correspond to Marduk severed Tiamat's arteries. I think this just describes the creation of rivers. And fountains here. In Enuma Eliš, this happens in 558. He bought wells to channel the springs. Then here, the day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. Thou hast set all the borders of the earth. Thou hast made summer and winter. So God has created the seasons and the day and night cycle. This is also done here by Marduk in 5.3. He appointed the year marked of divisions, set up the stars for each for the 12th month, and so he has organized the year. And down here he creates the moon god Nana, entrusting to him the night, and Shamash, the sun god. When Shamash sees you on the horizon, diminish in the proper stages and shine backwards. So he also creates the day and night cycle. And then back to the story. Here, after Marduk has killed Tiamat, he rested and surveying the corpse. So he looks at her corpse in Exodus 14:30. Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. So they also look at the dead corpses. Here Marduk's fathers saw it and were glad and exulted. They brought gifts. Okay, his fathers bring gifts. In Exodus 18:12, Jethro, an epithet of Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, so he makes he brings gifts for God. Then in 585, the Igigi assemble and all did obeisance to him. So they praise Marduk. Every one of the Anunnaki was kissing his feet. In Exodus 15:2, the Israelites praise God. Of course, they acknowledge his reign throughout chapter 15, basically. Here in 587, they all gathered to show their submission. They stood, they bowed down, behold the king. So they acknowledge his reign now. One interesting similarity is, maybe a weaker similarity, 686. Anu lifted Marduk's bow up and kisses the bow, saying, "It is my daughter." In Exodus 18:7-6. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, did obeisance and kissed him. So Jethro kisses Moses, and he brings Moses' wife Zipporah with him. So we have the father kissing and talking about the daughter. Maybe it might be connected, but I think that's a weaker point. Then in 4:121, Marduk takes the tablet of destinies from Kingu, which, of course, corresponds to Moses receiving the Ten Commandments. Here I will give thee tablets of stone and law and commandments. The tablet of destinies is has magic powers. The owner of this tablet is the ruler of the universe, so this gives you magic powers. And the tablets with the Ten Commandments also give magic powers. Here in Joshua 6:4-5, the Israelites make the city walls of Jericho fall down just using these tablets. Another very interesting connection, if you ask me, is that Moses gets the Ten Commandments on a mountain, right? Mount Sinai. Whereas in the Anzu myth, the goddess Mami, an epithet of the mountain goddess Ninchosang, talks about, "I, Mami, assigned the Enlil power," so the main god power, "to my brother. Anzu has disrupted the kingship that I designated." So he has obtained for himself the tablet of destinies. I might be wrong about this, but this sounds to me like this mountain goddess has created this tablet of destinies. Okay, the mountain goddess is the creator of the tablet of destinies, and Moses gets the Ten Commandments on a mountain. And also, Mami, Ninrosang, is not only the goddess of mountains, but also the goddess of the wastelands. And the Hebrew word for wasteland is Horeb, which is another name of Mount Sinai, right? So, I think that's another interesting connection here. And even more than that, on tablet 5, line 81, Mother Damkina, another epithet of Ninrosang, who bore him, hailed him with a clean festal robe, she made his face shine. Okay, Marduk's face shines after the mountain goddess has praised him in Exodus 34:29. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, the skin of his face shone. Interesting. So a mountain goddess makes Marduk's face shine, and after Moses comes down from Sinai, his face also shines. Then let's talk about these lines here. Marduk anoints his body, clothes himself with lordly robe. He puts on a crown, and he has taken the tablet of destinies, which he put on his breast. He wears that as a breastplate. And given that here in line 90, he is still dirty from the battle, I think we can conclude that in this missing line 91, he washes himself, possibly. And when we then look into Exodus 29, Moses is instructed to go to Aaron and his sons. He's supposed to wash them with water, put garments on them, and a robe and a breastplate, and put a crown on them and anoint them. That's interesting, right? That's 5 things that correspond with each other. They are washing, anointing, clothing, having a breastplate, and a crown. Then Marduk is declared king, which in Exodus 24:7 the people also acknowledge God as their God. They swear obedience, which here they do in line 116. Whatever you command, we will do. All that the Lord has said, we do. And then we have a strange passage, 118. Marduk talks about a beautiful place to his fathers, above the Apsu, the emerald abode, opposite Eshara, which I built for you. Beneath the celestial parts whose floor I made firm, I will build a house to be my luxurious abode. So he talks about building Babylon, and notice a few things here. He talks about an emerald abode, so that's jewelry, and they aren't apparently sure about the translation. I mean, above Apsu, the emerald abode, it doesn't make sense to compare Apsu, the ocean, to emerald, because emerald is green and the ocean is blue, right? So maybe this should be sapphire, which is a blue jewelry. And it talks here about the floor of heaven. that's a bit of a curious passage here, but compare that to Exodus 24, 9 to 10. Then went up Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, the 70 of the elders of Israel. So they all climbed on Mount Sinai. And they saw the God of Israel. Although seeing God kills you, according to other Bible verses. But there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were the body of heaven in his clearness. Okay, so it's a bit of a curious passage here, which isn't very clear, but both of these things are kind of weird, but they both talk about the floor of heaven being compared to jewelry and blue. So yeah, I think these are also comparable things here. And also here Marduk builds Babylon, and it's called his house. In Exodus 26, the tabernacle is built. The entire chapter. And this tabernacle, this tent shrine or tent temple for God is also called the house of the Lord. Then in 670, Marduk holds another banquet, another feast. In Exodus 32, 5, Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord," so they also have another feast. Marduk, the 7 gods of destinies were appointed to give decisions. So Marduk appoints judges, which Moses does in Exodus 18, 24 to 26. Moses chose able men, and they judged over the people at all seasons. Marduk then burns incense, which Aaron does in Exodus 30, 7 to 9. Aaron shall burn sweet incense. Food offerings are also in Exodus in 29:12. Thou shalt kill the bullock before the Lord, and thou shalt take the fat that covers the inwards, and the caul that is above the liver, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, and burn them upon the altar. So they also sacrifice food. The humans are instructed to remember. This is now quite common stuff that was basically in all these ancient stories. The humans are supposed to remember this. I don't know, maybe this Exodus 13:3, remember this day, might correspond to that, but I don't know. Though the Blackheads, the Sumerians, worship some another god, he is the god of each and every one of us. So Marduk is now the god of everyone. I think that's going in the direction of monotheism, maybe. So, God being the one and only God in the Bible, of course, corresponds to that. But in Tablet 5, line 6, this is another interesting connection. Marduk sends a guide called Neberu to guide the gods. And in Exodus 23:20, God sends an angel before thee to keep thee in thy way and to bring thee into the place which I have prepared. No one should transgress, so you should obey this guide. Beware of him and obey his voice, provoke him not, for he will not pardon your transgressions. So both the gods and the Israelites are forbidden to transgress this guide's instructions. And another interesting connection here is, for my name is in him, whatever that should mean, but in Enuma Elish tablet 7, line 129, this is a list of all the different names of Marduk. Let his name be Neberu, who grasps her middle. Let him fix the path of the stars of heaven. So yeah, Marduk also has the name Neberu. So this Neberu guide also has the name, one of the names of Marduk, just like my name is in him. Another, I think, at least possible connection. Okay, yeah, that's all the connections I've seen between Enuma Elish and Exodus. What do you think? Are you convinced that these are the same stories? I mean, we've seen like 80 comparable motifs. I think this is way beyond any reasonable doubt. This is absolutely the same story. And yeah, in Exodus, they've just thrown out the divine battle. I think apart from that, it's very clearly the exact same story. And we've seen other Bible verses that seem to reference older versions of Exodus where this part actually was still in there. So I think it's really silly to deny that this is the same story. But yeah, write it in the comments. What do you think? Do you think Exodus is Enuma Elish? Yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about for today. If you liked this video, like it, share it, subscribe, and see you next time.